Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 252. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Joining me on today's show is Joanne Leon. She's the host of the Around the Empire podcast and, one of my closest friends in this movement. Anybody who's been a longtime listener of this show knows that Joanne is frequently on, and of course, I highly recommend her podcast to everyone. Today marked Conflicts of Interest and Around the Empire both having their 252nd episode. So me and Joanne sat down, took some time out of our schedules to just record for like a half hour or so on some of our thoughts on the conflict in Ukraine. We really focused on the economic warfare going on. So I think people will find this conversation really interesting and a little bit different aspect of the war than we focused on the show so far, looking more at geopolitics and finance than just the sanctions aspect. So really excited for this interview. I think everybody's going to love it. I just want to remind people before we get to it that the show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and right now we are hosting our spring 2022 fund drive. So if you'd like to support the show and all the writing that I've been doing with Will Porter at the Institute, as well as the work of Scott Horton, Patrick McFarlane, Connor Freeman, Hunter DeRensis, Lori Calhoun, Sheldon Richmond, Keith Knight, Tommy Solomons, and so many other great libertarians, think about going over and donating to the Institute. There's great kitbats, muds, backpacks, butts, digital butts, anything that you could want that we have at the Institute. You could probably get some great kitbats. So go check that out, make a donation, support the show, and just remind people too that you can find the show YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version. Facebook and Twitter account. The Twitter handle is at @con_interest. My Twitter handle is at Kyle Anzalone _. And the sponsor of the show is Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That saves you 20% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback. High quality CBD products at a good price. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. All right, here's the interview with Joanne Leon. Hey Joanne, how's it going?
Hey Kyle, going okay? How about you? Other than there's a big war going on across the ocean.
Right. Other than being a little short on sleep, I'm doing all right. And it kind of a cool thing we have here today. I consider Around the Empire kind of the sister show to Conflicts of Interest and everything like that. And today we have kind of just a weird milestone where we both have episode 252 in our stream. So if you're listening to this or in Around the Empire or Conflicts of Interest, it's episode 252. And so we just thought we sit down today, talk just a few points about what's going on with Russia. And so Joanne, I thought I'd let you open up because I think you're going to talk about some financial stuff, which I talk about sanctions on the show, but not in the same detail that you want to talk about some of this. So I'm interested in what you think here.
Yeah, I mean, as I was telling Kyle a little while ago, I'm uncomfortable with all wars. I'm really uncomfortable with this one because I think that there are a lot of other aspects to it that are, I mean, they're getting attention in some sectors of the media, right? But not in ours. We don't tend to pay attention to this kind of thing. But I think that when they talked about wars being hybrid wars now, I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. I think that in addition to the hot war that's going on in Ukraine, there's a huge economic war going on. There's got to be a cyber war going on. We don't know that much about what's going on there, although I did just get a message last night, and I'm going to find out a little bit more about that tomorrow. So, but the economic war, I guess what makes me feel very uncomfortable is that I feel that some of this may have already been mapped out, and I'll explain why I think that, or at least one of the reasons why. I don't have a finance background. I did spend some time in the IT arena working for financial systems on Wall Street and things like that. So maybe I know a little bit more than the average person, but this is certainly not my expertise. But I just wanted to point out a couple of things among many that are happening. Um, well, I guess the big thing most people have probably heard that Putin came out and said that all their gas sales now among unfriendly countries will have to be paid in rubles. They were already, I think, transacting in euros, so that's not so much of a hit against the dollar, but it does create a bigger demand for rubles, right? If you need to buy rubles to buy gas, then you're going to have to do that. And the sanctions and the economic war that we have been waging on Russia since the Ukraine, well, for longer than that, but the newer war, um, that they took a that was a pretty big, it shook them, right? They shut down their stock market. They stopped issuing bonds. But that changed recently. And so they started issuing their longer, medium, and long term bonds again. And in Reuters today, they say the Russian ruble briefly leapt to a 3-week high, past 95 against the dollar on Wednesday in Moscow before settling close to 100 after President Vladimir Putin said Russia would start selling its gas to unfriendly countries in rubles. And then, just to continue reading another paragraph from Reuters, they say the potential ramifications of that move, which Putin ordered his government to sort out in 1 week, could boost the Russian currency, with a host of European countries still dependent on Moscow for much of their energy supplies. And then they mentioned that the trading for what they call the OFC, their medium long-term bonds, that resumed this week. And I had to go back and look for some background on that. They're coupon-bearing federal loan bonds. In 1998, this is one the Russian government defaulted on in 98. And so there wasn't a particularly big demand for these bonds, right? Because, you might not get your money back. But over time, they're saying that the share of foreign held OFC, so the amount of bonds that were bought by foreign parties, in 2006, it was at 25%. In February 2018, 33.9% of all of the outstanding bonds were held by foreigners. It dropped a little bit because of the sanctions against the U.S., but then it was a fair amount. People were really buying these bonds. And then they mentioned that in February 2022, the share of OFCs held by foreign entities dropped to about 18%, so significant. So anyway, they started trading these bonds again this week, and they said that their stock market would resume on March 24th, and it has been shut down for almost a month. And let's see, the central bank said last week that it would begin buying OFC bonds to limit volatility after it held its key interest rate at 20% in the wake of an emergency rate hike in late February. And their central bank has so far, they haven't disclosed how many of their own bonds they bought to prop up their market, but they do admit that they did that to stabilize prices. So anyway, the crash of the ruble sort of didn't happen the way that a lot of the bloviators said it would. So it remains to be seen, how this economic war is going to go. But the other big thing, I think, that came out was...
Can I ask you a question real quick, Joanne?
Yeah.
Just on this point. So one thing that I think me and you have probably mentioned in the past, and certainly something that we have at least talked about privately, is that there are countries like Iran and like Russia that I think have tried to sanction-proof their economy to some degree. But it doesn't seem like Russia was really there. I mean, they took a massive blow, and there's some assets that I don't know. You would assume that they would have maybe more protected. So, I mean, what do you think? Does it seem like Russia was fully prepared for this? Because it seems like the sanctions that the U.S. has put on have been fairly predictable, right? They haven't fully cut off the Russia from SWIFT or Russia from like natural gas into Europe and things like that, but they have put on some pretty sweeping sanctions. So I don't know. That's just one thing that hasn't kind of lined up to me. It seems like maybe Russia wasn't prepared for the sanctions, but they should have been if they were going to war because they had to know this was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess the only thing that I can figure, yeah, I was kind of surprised too because a lot of people were saying, they've stocked up on gold and, precious metals. They have huge amounts of reserves. I don't know about how the countries all measure out, but they seem to be in the best position in terms of debt and things like that. But I guess one of the things that some people said after we slapped those sanctions on them was that the fact that we went after their central bank was, was huge. And so maybe it's possible that they didn't think that that would happen because that froze their reserves, right? Limited their access to the reserves and such. And maybe they just never thought we'd go that far. But other than that, I don't really know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with you. They've also got, a very big partner across their border to help them prop up their currency, I would think, and help them do transactions. So I don't think this part has played out yet. I I think that some of this was in the works for quite a while. I mean, you even have Joe Biden mumbling something about, there's going to be a new world order, and like, and we just have to make sure that we're the ones who lead it. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? So anyway, we'll see if whoever's grand plan works or not. But there's some major shuffle going on. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, right? It's just we don't understand it.
Yep.
Um,
And I'm sure there's some stuff going on behind the scenes here too. We, assume that's the case in kinetic warfare, right? In conventional, like there's this covert aspect to it. But I'm sure this is going on in the sanctions game where the US is trying to look for things that they could possibly hit and sanction, and Russia is trying to secretly move stuff around and covertly move assets back into Russia. I'm sure this stuff is going on and we just have no idea of it. But it could be very significant if you're talking about like a Russian billionaire having like something seized. Well, that person could have major influence inside of Russia, and so these things can be very important. And even we have no idea how they're all playing out.
yeah, I mean, I don't understand the seizing of yachts. To me, that's just for the media
It
or
is.
something. Because I don't care if that. I mean, I think it's obnoxious to have these giant yachts, and I don't think any of those billionaires got that money in a because of their hard work, let's say, or because they were so superior or worked so much harder than anybody else. Yeah, I think they're crooks, but you know, going around and really, is that how you want to show that we're?
I do
Um,
think that part of that is probably personal because a lot of those are being targeted based on information given to them by the Alexei Navalny team. And so my guess is that they're they're picking some groups that they're not exactly are and people they're not happy with, right? And so, but
well, I
I
think
could
they
be
hope.
completely off, but that would be my guess.
I think you kind of hit on it before this. Is that I think they are hoping that these, oligarchs are going to be really pissed off at Putin and try to take him out, or just, create a ruckus. But my understanding is the ones that they went after were I shouldn't say because I'm not exactly sure. I was so annoyed by the whole thing. I didn't really read all the details. But were they, Putin's best friend oligarchs that they took the yachts from, or
Well,
not?
me and Will wrote up one article on the owner of the Chelsea football team who was sanctioned.
Abramovich, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a 2012 court finding from the UK that said his ties to Putin weren't nearly what the claims were. And so, you know what I mean? Like, right, like Jeff Bezos, even if he's like not in the pocket of Joe Biden, like there's so much business going on between the government and these major corporations. Like, yeah, there are significant ties, and I'm sure that these businesses in Russia, just like in the United States, try to be in good with the leadership, and that has been Putin for a significant period of time. But that's different than this portrayal of like this guy is Putin's best buddy and is bringing in the steel for the Russian tanks or something crazy like that.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, uh, um, I honestly, when I saw that kind of thing going on, I could only think of people like Bill Browder,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way he operates, right? I thought, Bill Browder's got somebody's ear, and you know, convince them to do this. Um, but so I guess what the reason why I'm on this subject to begin with is because there was a what was it? It was a discussion broadcast on the IMF YouTube channel, which I didn't even know they had a YouTube channel. But apparently, this happened yesterday, and the IMF the deputy head of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, Gita Gopinath, and I'm sure I botched that name. So this person said, here's some quotes. What we are seeing around the world is increasing fragmentation of payment systems that probably will further increase following this war. We know that energy trade will never look the same again after this war, and we are likely to see some countries reconsidering how much they hold of certain currencies in their reserves. So, fragmentation is indeed an important concern. Um, but she added that the sanctions on Russia and the related events, it's not like the U.S. dollar is not in any terrible danger. It's not the quote imminent demise of the dollar, but that currencies tend to have complementary roles. And she says, for instance, they have a role in an instrument of payment, another role as a store of value. Um, and if some of the world would start making trade payments in currencies other than the dollar or saving in other types of currencies, quote, then we could see pockets where we might see shifts happening. And I didn't notice this one before. And she noted that the longer the war goes on, the greater the impact will be. That's interesting. She said, here's the bit I'm trying to get to. Recent events will accelerate the consideration of central bank digital currencies around the world. More work needs to be done on the regulatory front when it comes to digital currencies, Gopinath stated. Which, I don't know, that didn't seem, I didn't watch the whole session myself, so I don't know if she said that at a different time in the talk or whatever, but, these certainties. I mean, I've been watching and reading some of the white papers of the World Economic Forum and other related kinds of organizations. And, the central bank currency, I'm not shocked about that. But I guess I am kind of shocked at how quickly this kind of thing is happening. Canada's already talking about it. Um, Biden just signed an executive order saying that he only went as far as to say that they were going to do research and development. But I mean, to me, that seemed, if you say development, like you're you're going to try to put it in place. So this is another reason why I'm so suspicious about this war. And I'm, from conversations we had, just, in our daily uh, running chat that we have, really since 2014, back in when this whole coup in the Maidan happened, at that point in time, a war with Russia was unthinkable. And even the biggest war hawks would say, well, we're not going to start a war with Russia, but, we're going to do this and that. But I just got a distinct sense that somebody was really trying to drum up a world war. And why? Why would anybody do that? And I guess if you're really trying to avert or do something drastic to limit the impact of a financial collapse, something like that, or you just have, a shift in power that's going on, and you have a group of the people who are the most powerful in the world want to make sure that they remain the most powerful. If they have some ideas on how to reorganize things, it's not something you could do very easily. It would either take a very long time and every move would have to play out, the way that you had planned it, or, a world war, assuming, to me, that's one hell of a risk. But, assuming that, I don't even know how to put this, but that's probably the fastest way to make a major change, reshuffle things, redraw maps, redesign financial systems. I mean, anything, right? Anything can happen after a world war. Do you agree?
I mean, it certainly does create the conditions for governments to, take executive actions. Like Zelensky this past week banned the political opposition, nationalized the state media, and we're seeing the U.S. The Pentagon float using the Defense Production Act. Me and Will Porter have an article on this at the Libertarian Institute today, on that they're looking at restructuring who gets the availability of like the rare earth minerals and things like that, and in what order, and giving Lockheed Martin and these other companies like additional money to buy up the products and to outbid everybody else. So it really does create the conditions for the economy to radically change very quickly. And I guess the only place I would maybe push back, Joanne, is I don't know if these people like the U.S. weapons makers, right? I think that they don't see the game that they're playing being as dangerous as it is because of how much they profit off of it, right? Like they don't think it will go that far. They think they could just push Russia and do what they want to do, and nobody's ever going to use nuclear weapons. And so yeah, some Ukrainians are going to die, but as we've talked about on this show because of you and the Brzezinski clip that you gave, that I think you're largely responsible for bringing up and exposing people to, they're more than willing to have people die for this. And so
Yep.
I think they think it works out very well and don't realize how much fire they're playing with on that aspect. And that's how they kind of get away with it, right? Is that everybody's just like, yeah, we know this isn't going to happen.
Yeah. And that Brzezinski clip, I either watched that in real time or like a day or two after it happened. Um, because I was thinking, like, is somebody really trying to start a world war here? It's still a totally crazy thing, but 8 years ago it was really totally insane and seemed kind of out of the blue. Um, I was always kind of interested in Brzezinski, but it struck me that this guy who I thought was pretty reasonable person, uh, because in the Middle East his policies were fairly, I don't know, realist. He wasn't a hawk so much. But as soon as you brought Russia into it, the guy just lost his mind. He just became completely crazy. And anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but it just seems like some people with a history, if their families came here from Eastern Europe and terrible things happened to them, and they get into policy, influential positions in the foreign policy, and I'm afraid that they don't always make give the best advice or the best. They're kind of scary.
Yeah.
Some of them. I can think of others. I don't want to
Yeah,
go
we
too deep down that, but
that interview I shared with you today of
yeah,
Cohen, the interviewer like starts off by saying, my family experienced the Soviets, so, and then this Cohen who works for NATO, or not NATO, Rand, excuse me, so
Rand, right?
kind of NATO, but not really. I get, there's a level of separation there, but yeah, he explains how basically the goal is to provoke Russia, and what does he say? Ukraine means everything to Russia and nothing to us, and that's
Well,
why they're doing
almost.
it.
It does. He stumbled. He like didn't know how to say it. He's like, it means a lot to Russia and not as much to us. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So,
yeah,
Joanne, on sanctions seem to be one thing that are dividing the world, and when you say this is planned out, the U.S. seems to have a lot of trouble getting a lot of states on board with this that you would think they would be able to get on board. And India is one example of this, but I just want to take a quick second to mention this video I just saw, video reporting from Voice of America, which is U.S. sponsor state media, but it's actually going to a flour factory and a tea factory in Kenya, and these are major exports for Kenya, and the sanctions on Russia are making it impossible for Kenya to export these products to Russia. And so these nice ladies who just sit there all day packaging roses, like, they're not puppets of Vladimir Putin or anything like that. Like, Putin's not benefiting in any way off of these flowers, but yet, they're potentially losing out on, and it's not like they've gone out of business yet, but they're saying, like, look, we can't sell products to Russia because nobody can process the financial transactions, and this is a huge mess. And so I don't know. I was just wondering what you think about getting countries like China and India specifically to go along, Pakistan too.
yeah. Well, I haven't looked into what's going on with India and Pakistan. Um, I'm not sure what are you getting at? Like
Well,
why they don't go along with the sanctions or
I mean, it seems to me to be a real sign that the U.S. has overstepped its
oh
hand
yeah.
on the economic war, and they really. I mean, I think this is something that we've been talking about for a long time, that the Biden administration has failed to understand the relationship between Russia and China. If they think that they could put pressure on China to cut off trade with Russia, that's just dumb. And it's been clear for several months now that that's not going to happen. But India is a country that is a part of the U.S. Pacific, Indo-Pacific, kind of alliance,
Yeah.
the quadrilateral, whatever they want to call it, thing that they're trying to put together, that informal group of states. And so I don't know. It kind of surprises me, I guess, that the U.S. would be willing to really try to put pressure on India over Russia when it's so critical of a state in their idea of a foreign policy against China, and how much is the U.S. really willing to risk, like, splitting all of these countries off into doing their own trade thing. I mean, that seems like it would be absolutely disastrous for the U.S. empire to have that would be the one thing that they would be trying to avoid.
Yeah, and that's why I guess I didn't take, was it Biden or was it Jake Sullivan? Somebody sort of mildly threatened India. Was it today or yesterday? Um, and my
Biden said
understanding
the
is that,
relationship was shaky. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com.
right, that was it. So I didn't take that all that seriously. And I also understand that India has signaled that they are willing to work with the US against China, but not Russia. So they're in sort of an odd position too. But um, it's going to be hard to long-term sanction any Russia with anybody, right? Because they're a major provider of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and I just don't think that it's going to work out long term, and I'm not sure whether it was even supposed to work out long term. One of the things that who was it? Niall Ferguson. I read so many things I could be getting them mixed up. But they were saying um, that the grand plan here is for. Let me just see if I can find it real quick. Actually, you know what? A more accurate thing is Lavrov did some kind of a Q&A session, and he claims that the United States is just trying to make a pariah state out of Russia, and that will, turn everyone against them. I would say that that will encourage people to keep the sanctions on because they already know they're really shaky and they're not going to hold for any long period of time. So create a pariah out of them and regime change. Ultimately, Lavrov thinks that regime change is the ultimate goal with Russia, which, I mean, I guess it has been for a really long time. But then he said that, um, and as soon as they succeed with that, they're going to come for China to regime change China, which I don't think that's the case at all. I really don't, and I wonder if it means that Lavrov is a little bit worried that China won't stick with them. So I am still not completely convinced, as you were saying, that that China and Russia have that solid relationship. India, I mean, they have a strong military business relationship with Russia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and they get energy from Russia. In what other way are they closely tied? I shouldn't
I
really
think
say because
there's some
I don't know
Soviet
that.
era like kind of leftover relationship. They bought the S-400. The Indian media has been very favorable towards this. And I guess just one counterpoint on that, Joanne. If I were sitting in Beijing and if Russia became a proxy state of America, man, I don't know. My number one thing is the empire needs a primary enemy at all times, and if Russia becomes a friendly state, then who else but China, right? Like, so I don't know. I get not to just repeat what Lavrov is saying, but I could definitely see the people in Beijing making that assessment. I think if I that would be like kind of my, this is what the U.S. empire is most likely to do.
Well, that's a good point. And again, back to Z Big Brzezinski. I don't want to like make him into some kind of god, but it's just a convenient example right now. He kind of like tossed all of his grand chessboard theories and all that stuff out the window in his last article. When he's like, I don't know so much about this empire thing, and but basically what he was saying is that you can't let Russia and China form a strong alliance. I've always been like, it's a little late for that. Why didn't you think of that in 2014 at the anyway? So and so Zbig says that we're going to have to pick one of those and align with it against the other. And I think he even admitted that I think his recommendation was that at least temporarily we have to align with Russia to counterbalance China. So in that sense, yeah, it's just I just don't think that regime changing China was like the goal.
At the beginning of the Trump administration, I could really see that have been like the smart foreign policy consensus, like grand strategy plan, was that China was the real enemy, and so we're going to reestablish ties with Russia. Too bad Hillary Clinton couldn't take the L, though, huh? And that was impossible. Just two more states that I want to mention here, real quick: Turkey and Israel, who are, as far as I could tell, leading the mediation between Russia and Ukraine to the extent that it's happening. As far as I could tell, Turkey has been a little bit optimistic. They've, put out that things are going far better than they actually are. And right before this happened, they were supposed to, Erdogan was supposed to go to Ukraine to help diplomacy, and ended up selling Ukraine a bunch of the TB2 drones. And so, but anyways, they have held the highest level talks in Turkey, so that's worth mentioning. In Israel, while they upset the Ukrainians by saying there was like a somewhat decent deal on the table or something like that, and Yair Lapid, the Israeli foreign minister and future, according to negotiations, Israeli prime minister, was rejected on a call by the Ukrainian foreign minister. So that's kind of significant. But at the same time, these are the two states that to the extent that it's happening in the world, are like mediating and seen as somewhat neutral parties. And the U.S. seems to be really taking an effort at making sure that can happen. They're pushing Israel to sanction more. Adam Kinzinger put out a big statement on Twitter. That's the Illinois representative, the Republican, saying that Israel needs to pick a side in all of this. And on the Turkey issue, me and Will Porter have written about this. They are looking at trying to get Turkey to transfer its S-400s to Ukraine, and then give Turkey Patriots, which I don't think Turkey's going to do. But at the same time, this kind of proposal could disrupt the Ankara Moscow ties and potentially disrupt talks. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that. We could wrap up there, Joanne, but I did, just the way that this is playing out in geopolitics, I find very interesting. I think you're muted, Joanne.
Yeah, sorry, it was noisy here for a minute. Yeah, I mean, Turkey's always has been fluctuating back and forth. So that one doesn't surprise me. Israel, I mean, I never quite understood. I knew they had a close but complicated relationship with Russia, with so much of their population being originally from Russia or from the Soviet Union. I think some of them have been there that long. So I don't quite understand it. I would have to pass on that question. I don't really know what's going on there, but Zelensky doesn't seem to appreciate it. So
Yeah.
that much. But I did find that article. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think part of it is like domestic politics in Israel, right? Like if you're condemned by the U.S. and China, Russia, and the whole UN Security Council, that could deal a blow. But if you maintain a relationship with Russia, then you could try to, pressure Russia to veto any resolutions that the U.S. won't, or at the very least that they're not like bringing everything to the front because you're the U.S. major proxy in the Middle East. And so I think it has been, that relationship definitely has been valuable to Tel Aviv in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that they're opportunistic, and I think Turkey's very opportunistic, and that's probably smart. Although it can seem kind of devious at times, but I just think that they are trying to get the most they can from either side,
Yeah.
from both sides, and not take a strong position either way. Although they demand that other people take strong positions for them, but whatever. But speaking of the not wanting a deal and not wanting this to conclude, maybe that is actually what that Bloomberg opinion article by Niall Ferguson talked about. It's titled "Putin Misunderstands History, so unfortunately does the U.S. Biden's making a colossal mistake in thinking he can bleed Russia dry, topple Putin, and signal to China to keep its hands off Taiwan." So basically, that's I don't want to spend too much time on this, but
It's worth I read it today. It's worth taking a look at and just reading through. It's not that I endorse everything in there, but it's an interesting take.
And I guess one of the big points that he makes is that we do prefer for this to be dragged out. That we really want to drag this thing out, which also goes to the point of what we were talking about before, where using the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder. If that's the case, I don't know if Niles Ferguson is right or not. Is it Nile or Neil? Is that another spelling for Neil?
I'm not. I
So,
wasn't sure.
yeah, I'll give you the link for that so we can stick it in the show notes. I'll put it in my show notes too.
All right. Yeah, I guess that's a good place to wrap up, Joanne. I would definitely recommend people check out the last conversation that we had too. Connor Friedman was on that show with us, and that was definitely the point. I was most convinced that there was going to be an invasion before it happened. Was on that show. I'm not sure if you're in the same boat as that, but I think we are all three pretty close to 50-50 that an invasion might happen. And a big part of what we talked about is that the U.S. would want a long, dragged out conflict in Ukraine to bleed Russia. And maybe that wasn't plan A, but doesn't seem like they invested a whole lot of effort in plan A, which is diplomacy at any point through all of this, which is incredible. So, Joanne, thank you so much for doing this again. And yeah, episode 252 of both shows. This was fun.
252.
All right. We'll do this again, Joanne. Thank you.
All right, Kyle. Thanks so much. Always great to do these shows with you. Appreciate it.
All right.